Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we are on episode 269, and we thought we'd talk a little bit about learning the rules in a new area. And this was kind of your topic there, Ben, and I know you may have a little story to go along with it, or at least a lead into this. So why don't you lead us in? Tell us your thoughts on this topic.
Well, yeah, I guess I do have a quick one, but it's not even the only one. It's something I've come across many a time. Every time I've moved to a new area, a new community, or new province, and I've done it a few times, way more than I'd like to admit. I have to learn about the local customs and rules and laws and stuff. So earlier this year, I think we talked about it. I was looking at getting a kayak. I managed to get one. We could probably have an episode on that in itself, uh, if we haven't already. But I wanted to test it. We always talk about, you get new gear, test it before you actually put it into the environment where you're going to depend on it. So I happened to be down in Washington State where I picked it up, and I said, I'll just go to the closest lake that I know has a boat launch. I'll just pop it in there. I have never heard of anyone having an issue throwing a kayak or a canoe in any body of water. Like, it's kind of an unwritten rule, I thought, that you could just throw them in bodies of water, do whatever you want. Nobody cares unless it's big and has like sump pumps and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, okay. And I go down there, and there's a big sign at the launching point saying, ensure you have your AIS, which is something invasive species. So, aquatic invasive species, I think is
Ah,
what it stands for. So I was like, oh, okay. And then there was another thing, I needed a permit. So it's like, oh shoot. So now I need two things. And a permit's like a wildlife permit. You get one, they're not even that expensive. 30 bucks a year gets you access to so much land in the States. It's not even funny. You can camp, you can hike, you can do all kinds of stuff. So it's worth it. But I just didn't have that particular one. There's a lot you can buy. Some encompass a whole bunch of things, but there's federal ones and there's state ones. And I had the federal one and not the state one because it worked better for the previous stuff I had done. So I ended up not getting to put my kayak in the water that day. And I got thinking about it as like, when has this happened to me before? And it's when I first moved to Nova Scotia, learning how do you go fishing, where you're allowed to
hmm.
fish, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say
Like,
I can't think of any real boating restrictions. There's a couple private lakes, or what they call private lakes. It's mostly just the people around the outsides of it that claim that it's a private lake, and they sometimes kick up a fuss and they want certain standards for the watercraft in there. But I mean, it's very, very infrequently that I've even heard of needing a permit to put a kayak in. Much like yourself, I always thought small watercraft. At most, you'd need like your pleasure craft license or something like that. You know what I mean? And make sure that you get your life jacket and, of course, all the stuff you need to be on the water. But I didn't know you needed a permit. This is
yeah,
news to me. Good thing I didn't go to the States.
this is it. This is this particular one, and it may even be that particular county that required that specific thing. So now, since then, I have now got my certificate. I now have passed the course, and I'm fully aware of the Aquarius invasive species of that particular area, and what I need to look out for, and how I need to properly clean my boat, make sure it's dry and free of any dirt or vegetation or anything else like mussels. And if you think about it, there was a big thing quite a few years ago now, how the Great Lakes were infested with zebra mussels.
Hmm.
And it's because we didn't clean the boats off well enough as they were coming upstream, and they never had managed to make it up the St. Lawrence River and into the Great Lakes until boats started coming up, bringing them with them. And those things blocked off like inlets for drinking water and septic lines and all kinds of other things, and caused huge problems with pumps and everything else. So it's a real thing, right? Like, invasive species can cause a lot of damage, can get rid of native wildlife, completely change the environment, and it's not something we want to do. And so there's legit reasons for a lot of these rules. But if you don't know them, you can quickly get yourself in trouble. Recently, not as recent as my story, but within the last 6 months to a year, I've seen on YouTube a young fellow that was trying to go fishing, and he actually stopped the police officer and asked him, am I allowed to fish in this area? And he's like, yep, as long as you stay within the waterways. And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, but from my understanding, from the high water mark in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, you can't own water below the high water mark. You can't own land or water below.
And once again, I could be outdated on this. Last I checked, it was 15 feet back from high water mark. That gives a surge buffer a little bit. And I mean, that's
Yeah.
around most water titles. That'd be like riverfront, stuff like that. About where the line ends, 15 feet back, is technically public pass through. Now, they don't. That doesn't mean you can set up a camp on there if it's in somebody's backyard or something. But I mean, you're allowed to travel it. But here in Nova Scotia, you and I both know the no trespassing laws and stuff like that. There's a lot of misconception on that. That's a whole other topic, and I'm not getting onto that. But that's kind of where this waterways falls thing into.
So this young fellow, there's only a couple of young guys. They were walking down the stream. They kept into the water because that's what they thought they were supposed to do. And they get so far down, and there's a wildlife hunting group that bought a large parcel of land on either side of the river, and they consider that river within their boundaries to be their river, and will call the police to have people kicked out of it for trespassing. And they harassed the young boys, in my opinion, and then the police were called, and the police actually said on video they didn't know who was in the right or was the wrong, but they asked the young fellas to leave just because it was easier than dealing with this group. But my understanding in many places that if you wanted to take that to court, they would find that they did not have that right. But I've heard in New Brunswick, for instance, that isn't the case, that you can actually own sections of a river and you can prevent somebody from fishing your section of the river.
So that's news to me. I'm not sure about out of province laws and regulations. Never really dealt with them, but I mean, that would be so hard to enforce. Would be my two things. Like, how would you? Anyway, that's a whole other topic, I guess, in its own.
But understanding these things, and it varies, I think, from state to state and province to province, and even potentially in some counties, and in how the land and water is being used. And so, if you are, say, a hunting outfit, and you were bringing in fishermen and hunters and stuff from outside of an area, you may want to protect that from just locals coming and fishing it and taking away from the exclusivity of that particular area. So it is a challenge. I can see where the business case would be for it. But obviously none of us want to go somewhere and get harassed or deal with people telling us you can or cannot be doing this, or this is where you can go or you can't. And it will stop people. Like some people, because they're on shore, and when I went through this when I first moved to Nova Scotia, it took me a couple of years to really get the camping and stuff I wanted to do because I couldn't understand where I was allowed to go and where I wasn't, because I found Nova Scotia had a hell of a lot of owned property, and you don't want to camp on somebody's own property, right? Because that can get you harassed.
Yeah, here in Nova Scotia, I think the Crown only ever tries or strives for between 11 and 14% of the province, which is actually quite a bit for one entity to own. But in the big scale of things, for the size of Nova Scotia, that's really not a lot of property. The majority of it is privately owned, as you said.
And I think if you look at my feeling when I was in Newfoundland, it was that number was almost the opposite within Newfoundland, and it was much more than 50% of it was technically Crown land. And what they did is they would lease access to it to larger industries like logging companies and mining companies, but they never stopped us from fishing and hiking and doing our thing. You weren't allowed to harvest trees without permission, and you couldn't build cabins. Other than that, nobody bugged you, right? So the laws change, but if you don't know them, it really can be a deterrent. And not only that, it can cause you to have unexpected issues when you're out.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of one instance, much like what you said. There was me and a couple of guys. We were trying to get through to a lake. And we thought it was Crown land, and long story short, it ended up being Crown land. Actually, it's, the waterfalls where you and I first
Yes.
did our camping. Behind that, there's supposedly a lake where there was an old sawmill and all this good stuff, and not where Mel and I tried to
Original lake?
find, but further back again, like way back. And
Okay.
we went in the backside to come into this bigger lake area, and we thought it was all Crown we were going through, and it was what, much like you said, it was old leased out land that went to, I think at the time it was Scott Paper. That's how long ago this stuff was leased out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as we were going through, we actually came across somebody that, swore up and down that it was his property. Turned out that he just had a hunting blind or something up there. Once again, it wasn't his. Well, the blind might have been his, but the property wasn't his. But still, these people get really uptight about it. And to not be confrontational, of course, me and Dave are just like, okay, sorry, we did not know this. We will find
Yeah.
another way in. But I mean, it's real easy to run into these situations. And people get pretty irate real quick when they think you're doing something that you're not supposed to be, even if you're in the right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you see it. You also see like people who really have no business will actually get in some people's faces and try to tell them to get lost in it. And I think the name of the lake in Nova Scotia is Long Lake. I wanted to go camping there.
Yep.
And so there is a Long Lake community, I think, on the south end of Long Lake, and it's kind of like I don't think it's gated, but it's the next thing to a gated community. It's a really nice place actually. But the public access is on the north side, so we drove down to it and we tried to get in, and the public road. We did a lot of research. It showed us how to get in there. It looked like you had to drive through some guy's driveway. You literally, that's what it felt like. And then I got so far in, and I'm like, man, I am not sure my minivan with trailer is going to make it down this goat path. And that's what it was. It was a goat path. Like I made it a few hundred feet. Then I walked a few hundred feet, and I said, man, if it doesn't get any better, I won't even be able to turn around if it gets worse. And so I decided to, I'm a few hundred feet in now. I'd much rather back up a few hundred feet than a few thousand feet. So I backed out of that, and we decided to go some other way. And what we did was there is a public launch within Long Lake community, and we went in there and went camping. And while I was camping, I canoed up to that entrance, and I checked out where it met the lake. And when I get there, there's a young fellow there with a jacked up Toyota Tacoma with oversized tires, and obviously somebody who looks like he's been doing some pretty serious off-roading. And I get chatting with him, and he said he wouldn't go down that road with much less capable of a vehicle than his. And I'm like, okay, my minivan is not. And so I will leave my two-wheel drive minivan where it is and not do that road. But it comes down to research. We looked it up on mapping programs. We tried to look up some research. We weren't able to find any communities talking about it, so I couldn't talk to any individuals. And so the next best thing for me was to check it out. Now, fortunately, that was under an hour from my house. So worst comes to worst, I would have found another solution. But if you're traveling any distance, these researches and talking to locals and figuring these things out, that's invaluable information, and it's really what makes the difference, right?
And that's the big one right there, which we were kind of hoping we'd loop around back to. The best way to get information on a lot of this stuff is to talk to the locals. Research and stuff like that is good, but unless you know where to look, it can be hard to know where to start. And the best place to start, honestly, that I have found for most of the local places and places I've been, is talking to the locals. And that doesn't mean you have to necessarily go out and find somebody and say, hey, how's it going? My name's Robert. Tell me about this stuff, which ultimately, in my opinion, is still one of the best ways to do things. Call me old-fashioned. I like face-to-face stuff. But with the innovation of the internet and things like that, generally you can find groups that are specific to the area you want to go, and they'll have a lot of information on there, or at least they'll point you in the right direction or be able to answer some of your questions. And I mean, for me, one of the big ones that comes to mind is hunting around here. The hunting laws here can be a little confusing unless you're familiar with them, which I'm sure you know what I'm talking about there, Ben. Where you can go, when you can be there, when you can hunt, where you can't hunt, what you can hunt, can you move that harvest from that area? Like, there is a lot of weird little things in here, and it's all about the invasive species and stuff like that. Like, for a deer, if you harvest a deer, they want you to clean that animal in the area where you harvested it, just to simply try and halt the spread of ticks and other parasites and things like that. You know what I mean? Like the brain worm and stuff like that was running rampant a few years ago. They figured that's how that scurried around. But unless you know these things, what's to stop you from coming in and being like, oh, I didn't know? And ignorance in Canada is not a defense in court, as some of us know. So yeah, for me, I find that it's really good to jump online and just start chatting with people. There's a lot of good forums, and it might start some rabbit holes. You know what I mean? And Ben and I are no stranger to rabbit holes. We research a lot of things and dive down other paths. But that is the best idea in my mind, is get online, get on Google, even Facebook. Facebook, 9 times out of 10, you throw in an area name, there's going to be some sort of group that's local to that area. It may not necessarily be the kind of group you're looking for. So if you're looking for, like fishing Nova Scotia, in a specific lake, for Long Lake, for instance, but if you throw Long Lake in, you might find like Friends of Long Lake or something like that. And they could tell you the best way to get in or what you can fish from there or whatever. You know what I mean? Don't necessarily look for the most direct route for your information, but broaden your search a little bit. Once you get one thread, man, you can start pulling stuff and unraveling a lot.
I mean, how many contacts did we get through? Give them a plug; they deserve it. Nova Scotia Bushcraft.
Oh man, half the people I know in Bushcraft, well, probably more than half. The majority of people that I know in Bushcraft are in one way or another related to Nova Scotia Bushcraft. And that was, once again, just a stumbled upon Facebook page for me. I typed in Bushcraft Nova Scotia.
I go a lot of the social media. I mean, you got your TikTok, your Instagram, your Facebook, Reddit. These are all means to find information. And what I do is I type in some keywords, hiking, fishing, hunting, camping, and I join a lot of these groups. Now, some of them you pretty quickly realize, not my group, not what I'm looking for, but other ones are, right? You have to filter through them. The good comes with the bad, and if you're afraid to see the bad, then you're never going to find the good, right? Like, if you're looking for gems in the woods, you're going to pick up 1,000 rocks before you find a good gem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
So, if you're looking for a good site, you're going to find probably 1,000 sites that don't do what you need before you find the ones that you do. But once you find those, they tend to link you to others. And so then it does get easier. And of course, look up your go to your government pages and look up the guidelines. Go to the hunting pages. Even if you're not interested in hunting, it usually has a hell of a lot of information of where you can go and what you can do. And as you learn this stuff and you reach out, you'll start making these people. YouTube. Interestingly enough, you can type in almost every lake, every hike, anything you can imagine. You'll find somebody who's been there and done something and shot a video. And then you can reach out to those people, similar as you can reach out to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures and ask us questions, and they'll tend to answer to you. Not everyone answers right away, and sometimes they won't at all because
whatever.
Maybe the channel's dead, or it's slow, or they do it for their friends and they're not really looking to, expand too much. But that's okay. Like, you'll get things, and it's gonna help.
No, and some of them, they're actually all the more eager to actually start answering questions and stuff because maybe they're new into it and they're just, this is the first bit of feedback they had. I remember when we first started ours and the first question that rolled in and that giddy feeling I got, like, holy crap, somebody's actually watching us that's not better. But yeah, no, reaching out to people is 100% the way to do it. I mean, once again, you can go and you can look up your regulations or at least attempt to. But unless you know where to start, it becomes very complicated very quickly. And it's really complicated when it comes to invasive species. which you started talking about with your kayak story there at the start. I mean, I wouldn't even know what species to look for that would be considered invasive to that area. You know what I mean? Like here in Nova Scotia, big one I think of is the longhorn spruce beetle. You remember when that was a big thing there, and the gypsy moth, like, I don't know how many ever years ago that was now.
Yeah.
Until somebody told me it was an invasive species, I just thought it was another bug that was here in Nova Scotia. You know what I mean? Didn't know what to look for, didn't know how to stop its transfer, didn't know nothing. It just looked like another beetle.
I mean, sometimes it comes down with just good, and I'll use this word, environmental hygiene. Um, if you go fishing in one lake, don't go scooping up raw water. Don't go taking a cooler full of water and throw some live fish in there and then get to the next lake and decide to just pour it all in there because you didn't get enough, you know. Leave at one lake what came from that lake. Don't go to another lake and carry things over, right? Same thing with plant matter and all that. Like, it's easy enough to do. And a lot of aquatic plants, you don't need much of a plant, a stem, a little bit of material, and it can grow from that sometimes.
Or parasites is another thing. I've seen a lot of times, yeah, that harmless little water you scooped up with your livestock or with your fish, you dump it out somewhere else. You don't know what kind of parasites that you're now introducing into another ecosystem, potentially, or waterway, whatever you want to call it, that's not prepared to deal with it. Like in the lake that you previously got it from, maybe there's another organism or something that has thrived that feeds on said parasite, bacterium, bug, fungus, whatever the case it may be, that's not present in the other one, and it's going to literally run it over. I mean, perch. Perch is an invasive species in a lot of lakes here in Nova Scotia. When they get in there, they literally just mow the lake over. They eat all the small food for the other fish that are in there, and they basically become the prominent fish to the point where that lake can no longer sustain them. And then they kind of start dying off on their own, but they've already taken the majority of the other life out of that lake with it. And it only takes one or two perch, one female full of eggs, you know what I mean? Can ruin a lake.
Chain pickerel is wild and catchy right now.
Yeah, there's another one. Chain pickerel. Gasparo. That's another one that sometimes comes through the rivers here.
Yeah. So I mean, you have to keep an eye on this stuff. But yeah, if you clean and dry your boats, if you clean and dry your gear before you go from certain areas, firewood is one that a lot of people are scared of it, and I have mixed feelings on some of that. But bugs and stuff can get into that firewood and maybe end up in areas that they're not naturally to. And next thing you know, they start to blossom in an area they've never been in, and that area has no natural predators, so it gets out of control, and it could be years before it finds a new equilibrium. I do believe nature will generally find a new equilibrium, but what that'll look like and how long that'll take could be sometimes years or centuries before it finds something that's viable again, right?
And funny enough, just on the firewood one, folks that are wondering why most parks make you buy their firewood, that's one of the major reasons they push, is they don't want any invasive species coming into that park. Once again, the longhorn spruce beetle was a big push for a lot of the provincial parks here in Nova Scotia for not taking firewood in. Not only that, they don't know what you're taking in for firewood and what you're trying to burn in there either. You know what I mean? Your firewood could be old pressure-treated lumber, and theirs is generally wood that was harvested from that area. Usually it's blowdowns and stuff like that. They'll clean it up, pull it out, cut it up, sell firewood out of it. The downside of that is you might get hardwood, softwood, popple, anything in between, you know what I mean? But that's generally why they do that. Like Ben said, it's to stop the spread of invasive species. And honestly, I didn't really realize that, though I know the literature was out there now that I know a little better. But when I started working for natural resources, that's when I learned a lot of that, even though there was a big sign right there in the park: do not bring your own firewood in, prevent invasive species. And I'm like, oh yeah, really, what kind of species am I going to be introducing? I got my wood from literally 50 kilometers down the road. It's all Nova Scotia. It's not like I'm taking it from Mexico or something. No offense to anybody from Mexico, just using something that's nice and far away. But yeah, sometimes it doesn't take very far for a species to kind of be somewhat contained. Look at black-legged ticks here in Nova Scotia that carry Lyme disease. Originally, there was only certain areas where Lyme disease was even prevalent. Now it's pretty much the whole province. It's just been traveled around on deer and people and birds and everything else, and now it's basically the majority of it.
True. Yeah. So I had a random monitor problem. I gotta fix. Yeah. So there's there's those rules too, for sure. Like, what are the environmental rules? How can you protect it? The other interesting one, and we both had this, is know what you're allowed to do. Fire is a big example of it, but even cooking. Keep losing my monitor. Um,
Oh, that's no good.
even cooking is sometimes an issue. You know what I mean? Like, can I bring this type of stove, or can I bring this type of cooking system? Um, because it's not always appropriate.
Still losing monitors there, buddy?
Yeah, I think I got it a bit under control, but I don't know. I might have a loose connection somewhere. Ah, it's fine. We are okay. We will be fine. um, yeah. So I mean, how often have we gone and it said, there's a fire ban. You can't have fire. Well, does that mean I can't use my alcohol stove? Does that mean I can't use my twig stove? Can I use a barbecue? Can
What's
I
considered
use?
an open flame? That argument
Yeah,
starts up every single year.
but these are the things I want. You want to look into before you go to an area, whether it's a new province, a new county, or a new state, or new whatever. Look into what you're going to be allowed to do. Don't assume that something is allowed and something is not. Um, Even to what are you allowed to carry? Um, I have found recently that I guess bear spray has been banned in some national parks.
Yep, because people were starting to, well, I don't know if this is why, but one of the things that started happening was people started carrying bear spray not for the bears, but for people. And the people were getting hosed when they shouldn't have necessarily been getting hosed. So, you know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff there.
But they also won't let people carry guns, and some people are nervous in the woods without some kind of protection. Right?
No, 100%. Like, I mean, I can see both sides of the coin. You know what I mean? And there's, before I go much further, disclaimer. Directly on bear spray, it says not to be used on people. Same as your dog deterrents or any of that. They were never designed for that. But I do understand why some people carry them for that reason. I mean, there's some weird people out there, man. People do weird things. You know what I mean? I say that every day. People do weird things. Does that necessarily mean they need to be bear sprayed? Depending on your situation. You know what I mean? I'm not condoning it or endorsing it. I'm just saying I understand the thought process. Not that it's right or wrong.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we had a chat with my daughters actually one time. We were out, and we had to step away from the campsite, and we told them, like, the bear spray is there if you need it, and it isn't to be used on a person. But honestly, in my opinion, and this is where we get into the gray area, if it was down to my daughters' lives, yeah,
Listen, man, I've
right.
always said it's better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
Yeah. So if it gets to the point where you're truly afraid for your life, I'm going to use whatever I have to protect myself. Now, that being said, it shouldn't happen. It should not be a necessity. But yeah, if you can't take bear spray, you can't take a gun, and you go in. And there was just a boy here. I seen it today. I didn't read the article. Here in BC, a boy got mauled by a bear. Right? So
Yeah,
it happens.
it does
Right?
happen. It's very rare, but it does happen.
And how do we prevent it? Like, we don't feed it. Feed the bears. Do not give bears food. It teaches them that people are sources of food, and then they start to chase people, thinking they're going to get food, and it leads to misunderstandings. It leads to the likelihood of somebody getting attacked, going up. So, best solution: don't feed the bears. When you're eating, don't eat really close to where you're going to sleep, because if they come around later, they may just stumble upon you when they're smelling food and they're looking for the food. It's much better for them to go a few hundred feet away. They're probably not going to come over to you. You smell like a human. They don't really want to deal with you. But
And that's the thing people got to realize with bears is bears are naturally lazy creatures. Almost anything alive is naturally lazy when given the opportunity. Not many things go out there and go out of their way to put out more exertion than they absolutely have to. Bears are looking for the highest calories, with the simplest turnaround. They want the more calories coming in than going out. That's why green bins and blueberry fields and raspberry fields and stuff like that are such big things for bears. Their one mission through the summer when they're awake is put enough calories and stuff on to take them through hibernation. And if they can sit down and eat your green bin full of lobster shells and not have to put out a whole lot of effort, you know where Mr. Bear's going to go? The smorgasbord. He's not going to go romping through the woods looking for Mr. Rabbit or whatever. He's going to sit down and have the all-you-can-eat buffet green cart. And this goes to feeding them, much like you said. And in a lot of areas, it should go without knowing this. I can't think of one place where anybody would be like, yeah, go ahead, feed the wildlife. Maybe like a petting zoo. But other than that, outside in the wildlife, you should never be feeding them. It does teach them that humans carry food. And they're
Yeah.
more apt to come around food, and they lose their, or sorry, potentially around food, come around humans, and they start losing their natural fear of humans. This shouldn't be one you folks have to research, but just to reiterate, don't feed the wildlife. It messes things up for everybody, including the wildlife.
Well, a story, not overly proud of it, I guess. We used to have a cabin in the woods, and we would go there. I loved that cabin. It was a beautiful place, probably one of my favorite places in the world. And there were gray jays. You know what a gray jay is? Whiskey jack, whatever you want
Yep.
to call it. Beautiful animals. They're very trainable. Uh, with a little bit of seed, a little bit of bread, you can train these things to sit on your hand. They'll sit on your shoulder. They'll follow you around like puppies. Um, and so we did. We had tamed them, and we had basically made friends with them. Every time we show up to the cabin, they come flying to us, and it was great. A neighbor figured out that they were really easy targets for pellet guns after that and would shoot them. And so
The best
here's
of
my
intentions, right?
right there's my caveat. It's like we all like to feed the birds. We put feeders out. We do things like that. Same with squirrels and stuff. Some people hate squirrels. Some people love squirrels. One person feeds the squirrels because they think they're beautiful. The neighbor got bird feeder out. Now the squirrels are eating the bird feed. They don't want that, so now they're killing your squirrels. And so when we feed animals, we do change their environment. They become dependent on us. Some birds will stick around longer than they're supposed to because there's a steady source of food. And if you stop feeding them, it's too late for them to travel south or to their more winter grounds, and that can be a danger. So, yeah, I agree with you. Don't feed the wildlife if you can at all help it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like it's long run. Generally, it's more detrimental than good. And there's tons of research on that. You know what I mean? Like, kind of getting off topic, but this is a funny story. When I worked for Natural Resources, there was this one deer. These people had raised it since it was young, and I think I might have told this story before, so I'll keep it quick. They raised it since it was young. It was a young male deer, and once it got older, it went into rut, and surprise, surprise, it turned on the people that used to, raise this thing. Funny enough, when we had to go pick this thing up, it had like the Mardi Gras beads around it and a bunch of other stuff. And because people used to, hang out with this deer, thought it was their friend, and then it got a little crazy because of the rut, and that all changed. Long run would have been far better just leave that deer alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's always long run. Short term, most times, yeah, it's completely harmless. I agree, but it's long run. Once they develop a change in their normal habits.
Yeah. So, yes. So the big things here is, actually, this might be a short episode.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're kind of wrapping this one up. I feel like here, but that's okay. Doesn't seem like there's anyone joining us tonight, so I guess this is just gonna go out to our normal listeners.
Yeah. So I think the big thing though is when you're going somewhere new, take the time to do the research of what's required there. Try to talk some locals and see if you can find out anything. Do as much research as you can, especially if you're traveling greater distances, because I've done it where you travel a big distance and you get there and realize it's not what you expected, and now you're trying to change plans last minute, and that can be stressful and hectic. It can't lead to great stories. Don't get me wrong; it doesn't mean it's the end of your trip, but sometimes it means you're purchasing permits, or you're having to change out gear, or you can't use certain gear, or you're required to have certain gear. and you have to get that last minute. It can mean a delay of maybe a full day to get some of this stuff, right?
No, 100%.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't
Even
really
road
think I have
trips.
anything else on this topic, Ben.
Yeah, I thought it was important to bring up. I think it's a nice short episode, but yeah, it's really important to find out what do you need? Is there courses? Is there permits? Is there equipment? Is there anything that you need to be in an area? Some places require things like uh, bear canisters or bags. If you're camping in a registered campground or you know national parks and things like that, they'll post their rules pretty clearly. But then there's other things when you're doing more crown land area. Make sure you understand the local rules and regulations, and what are the customs? Like, is there a place to park? That's been a huge problem for us. Where can I leave my vehicle? And when I come back, will it still be there?
Yeah, that's the follow-up important question that a lot of people miss. Yeah, you can park there, but you're not going to have a car when you come back. And I've been
Well,
in that
and,
situation where my car hasn't gone missing, but my car has been very obviously tampered with.
yeah, right. And you hear stories now, especially people getting their catalytic converter stolen or their tires taken, or there was one time I had somebody throw 4 or 5 bags of garbage in the back of my vehicle.
Yeah, any of us with a half ton or a pickup truck of any kind, I think we've all experienced the you go into the mall and come back out or in a Canadian Tire, wherever you happen to be, and you got like 5 Tim Hortons cups that are not yours sitting in the back of your truck.
Yeah.
Because everybody seems to think that is the local trash can. Don't know why, that's weird.
And there's nothing better than driving down the highway and watching one fly at the back of your truck, and you're like, "What the
What
heck
the
was that?"
hell was that? I don't
And
remember
then you
drinking Starbucks. I can guarantee you I didn't drink Starbucks.
and then you look back there, and there's a cop, and they're like, "Woo!"
Do you know that you've been littering? Well, no, sir. I did not know I was littering, seeing I didn't know I had anything in the back of my truck. Which, guess what? Ignorance is not an excuse in Nova Scotia. Ask me how I know this, Ben.
How do you know this, Robert?
Because I might have been in this exact situation. Funny enough, though, the cop was good about it, laughed, made me pick the stuff up, of course, but that was the end of it.
So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Anytime you're going somewhere, do that research, find out what you need to do, talk to the locals, look at local websites and stuff, look at the trail guides. There's plenty of apps and stuff to tell you about this stuff. Figure out that stuff, do your research. But then don't be afraid to get out there and enjoy it and do it. And once you do it a few times, the next time is much easier. You've been through it. You know what to do.
Oh, 100%. And there's something to be said about the saying, fortune favors the bold. Be
Yeah.
bold, but be educated at the same time. Don't be blindly bold, I think is where I'm going with this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's best to know the rules, and then if you're breaking them, at least you know what you're doing.
At least you know what to expect.
Well, it is though, because if you're completely unaware, you don't know what it's going to get you into. But maybe it's, maybe it says you have to have a beer canister, and you're like, my Rubbermaid container's good enough. At least you know, right? And if you do get in trouble and they tell you to leave, at least you're aware that this was a possibility, and it's not going to be a shock to you.
Exactly.
So you're taking an educated risk, where otherwise you're just taking
Risk.
unknown risks, and that's scary, right? Yeah. So yeah, let's wrap this one up. 40 minutes I think is a personal best for us.
Yeah, that's
Been a
actually
long
pretty
time.
good. And we even got a couple stories and rambles in.
So yeah. Anyways, awesome. Thank you everyone who listens. Get out there and have fun, and do your research before you go.
See you next week, folks. Same time, same place. And like Ben said, just make sure you know before you go. Night, everyone.